Hello and welcome to the Fighter Pilot's Guide to Living. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today I am beyond honored to be here with retired Rear Admiral Frederick Bad Fred Lewis, who accumulated an incredible 6,500 accident-free flying hours in tactical aircraft and more than 1,200 carrier-arrested landings in his flying career. A 1962 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, Bad Fred was designated a naval aviator in November 1963, and initially became a flight instructor before training on the F-4 Phantom in 1965. Bad Fred deployed throughout the Atlantic and Pacific theaters, as well as twice deploying to the Gulf of Tonkin to participate in combat missions in North Vietnam. He then attended the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School in 1969, but in so doing missed the opportunity to be a Blue Angel, which I know we'll talk about later. Following F-14 transition and a tour in VF-14, Bad Fred and a team established the F-14 RAG in Oceania in 1974. Bad Fred went on to have multiple command assignments and was in command of CAG-8 on the USS Nimitz when his pilots downed 2 Libyan fighter aircraft in the Gulf of Sidra in 1981. After inaugurating the Super CAG program and taking on several prestigious staff assignments in Washington, D.C., Bad Fred was selected for promotion to flag rank, eventually taking command of Carrier Group 4. Prior to retiring, Bad Fred stood up the Naval Doctrine Command as its commander in 1993, and following retirement, Bad Fred was president of National Training and Simulation Association. He was formerly chairman of the Tailhook Association, becoming part of a team that reconciled the Navy and the Tailhook Association in 2000. He has also served as president of the Early and Pioneer Naval Aviators Association, otherwise known as the Golden Eagles. Bad Fred, your whole intro, and this is only maybe a quarter of the incredible things that you've done in your career in naval aviation. So I can't even begin to tell you how special it is to be here with you and to hear your stories today. Thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here, and thank you for your kind words of introduction. I'm not quite sure whether or not I measure up to your enthusiasm in terms of what I did in my career, but I had some fun, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Well, I can tell you from having heard my dad say amazing things about you that you are well deserving of all of those compliments. I'd love to start by asking when you knew that you wanted to fly and whether it was before or after you earned a spot at the U.S. Naval Academy.
No, in fact, being a midshipman and subsequently a naval officer was as far as my earliest recollection of my life and my ambition, the things that I wanted to do with my life when I grew up and being a kid, was to go to the Naval Academy. That was my number one goal. I had no thought whatsoever what warfare specialty I wanted to do. I didn't have any sort of driving ambition to be a pilot or anything else. Maybe submarines I thought first. But anyway, so the driving ambition was based on my dad's encouragement, who was a veteran of World War II. And his encouragement, pointed me in that direction to seek an appointment at the Naval Academy, and then that happened, which was to my delight. And then once I'm there, then we go through the rigors of life at Annapolis, and and doing the things that you do as a midshipman. And they start thinking after 2 or 3 years, well, gee, what am I going to do next? So I initially thought about being a submariner until I went aboard one once. I said, this is not for me. What do I do next? So I thought, well, heck, being a Marine might be kind of cool. So I said, no, I'm not going to do that. They wear wool uniforms in the summertime. I'm not going to be a Marine. This is the logic of a 20-year-old, right? Anyway, so I said, how about a surface warfare guy? I said, no, I don't think I'll do that. But what's left? Well, I think I'll be a naval aviator. So that's how I came about becoming a pilot. And then as I went to flight training, of course, I wanted to be the best and be the front line. And that was to be a jet pilot, a jet fighter pilot, a Navy jet fighter pilot, naval aviator, flying on and off aircraft carriers. That's where I really started to focus my energy and efforts in trying to be successful in that field.
That's incredible. I'd love to go back because when we were preparing for this, you told me an incredible story. You kept it on the straight and narrow during your Naval Academy tenure, unlike people like my father who earned a black N and somehow lived to tell the tale. But I would love to hear the story of that one exception to your tame period at the Naval Academy with the Herndon Monument, and if you don't mind
Um,
sharing that.
that's not the one exception. There were other things that occurred also, but I'm not willing to talk about those. But we can talk about the Herndon Monument if you want to do that. But it's kind of amusing.
Oh, definitely. I'm glad to know that there are others that we can't talk about. That alone is
I
humorous.
never had the distinction of winning a black end like your dad did, but I came close. So anyway, so yeah,
Oh,
the Herndon Monument story. Plebe year, the end of plebe year, a plebe is no longer a plebe until such time as he and his classmates are able to put a Dixie cup, a midshipman's cap that has a blue rim on it, on atop the Herndon Monument, which is an obelisk that sits in the Naval Academy yard, directly across from the Naval Academy chapel. So the ritual usually occurs right after graduation. The plebe class goes out and to the monument and attempts to put the cap on top of the monument. And every time when it's done, the monument is prepared for their arrival, and the monument is greased up and so forth, and a lot of mud down at the bottom, and you have to pyramid to get to get up on top climb on top of your classmates and finally get a hand on top of the monument. So we thought it'd be kind of amusing if we did it a few days prior to when it was normally scheduled. So we huddled up and said, well, let's do this. We'll get up at dark 30. We'll slither out of the Bancroft Hall and make our way across the yard to the obelisk, and we'll somehow or other we'll get to the top of the monument. Well, we did that. We woke early, slithered out of the hall, made our way over to the monument. Somehow or other we found a ladder, if you can believe that, but the ladder was very helpful, of course, getting up to the top of the monument. So that's what we did. We got up there and put the Dixie cup on top. We slithered back to our rooms and went back to sleep. Reveille occurred, and then the brigade starts marching to classes, and then it wasn't long, about maybe 2 hours after the day began, that we were summoned to the group of first class midshipmen who accused us all of doing this horrible sort of thing, ruining tradition and so on and so forth. So they put us through our paces as a midshipman, as a plebe, and they rode us pretty hard for a couple of days. But after that was over, then everybody went their merry way, and we had a great time. So nobody got a class 8 for it. That is, nobody earned a black end for that little episode. But we felt pretty proud. We were able to, through hook or by crook, we made it happen. Got the cap up there at the top of that monument. We thought it was a real mark of good thinking, and clever thinking. So we were proud of ourselves. But anyway, it was fun. I wouldn't change that one either, even though it did cost me a lot of sweat and so forth afterwards, as I had to undergo a punishment that I was meted out by upperclassmen.
That's funny. Just when you're not sweating actively and going through that, it's always funny in the aftermath. So I'd love to go to initial flight training. You were initially assigned to be a flight instructor. Was that because you had, distinguished yourself so greatly in flight training that they wanted you to train other pilots, or how did that happen? And was that the path that you were hoping to take?
Well, I got my wings in November 1963 at Kingsville, Texas, and fully expecting to go to. I had requested the West Coast in fighter squadron on the West Coast, but surprisingly, a couple of days before we actually were winged, and there wasn't any big formal ceremony for winging. We just thought the day we were getting ready to leave and get our orders handed to us. The CO of the base was there in the front steps of the admin building. There were 3 of us, just him and us, and no family, nobody around, no formal ceremony of any sort. Cold, windy day in Kingsville, Texas, and he handed us our orders, and didn't pin them on, just handed us a pair of wings, and said, "Congratulations, gentlemen, there are your orders. Execute your orders." My order said, "Report for duty to Pensacola, Florida." And I said, "What's this all about?" I said, "Well, you've been selected to be a plowback surgrad," the program is called. So at that point, I knew I was going to go back as a flight instructor. I don't know what the exact metric was. I think it was just a numbers game, quite frankly. They just needed instructors to pump out flight students and get them out to the fleet. So anyway, I got my car, drove home to California from Kingsville, Texas, then turned around a couple weeks later and drove back to Pensacola, start my life as an instructor in the T-28B Trojan aircraft.
That must have been some drive. I can't imagine California to Pensacola. And what did, I mean, I've heard stories of what Pensacola was like in, the late 70s. What was it like in the 60s when you arrived there?
Well, Pensacola, I'll get to Pensacola in just a second, but after I had my leave in California, after I got my wings, I set off eastbound to go to Pensacola, and the day I set off was the day that Kennedy was assassinated. Driving along the freeway there in the Los Angeles area, and driving along this when I got the news on the radio. But I had to press on my motor, so I continued on my way. And that was back in the day before there was really a really expansive interstate highway system. So you were really genuinely committed to Route 66. So Route 66 all the way as far as you could go to the east, and you had to cut down to Pensacola. Checked into Pensacola and went through an under instruction training, 2 weeks of that, and then was sent to Whiting Field out in Milton, Florida, to fly the T-28. And so I began my life as a flight instructor. I was there for 11 months. And then in 11 months, I accumulated 850 flight hours. My high month was 125 hours. That's a lot of flying. I flew 4 to 7 sorties a day, plus flying across countries on the weekend to generate. And it was really a race between me and a classmate of mine who was also one of the instructors, and see who could win instructor of the month. And it was usually given to the person who accumulated the most flight time, for a month, and I won. I was instructor of the month for that month as a lieutenant junior grade.
Wow. That must have been a really, this is something because I've heard you talk too about, we'll get into this later, but you and Snort and who's going to get most of this and who's going to have the most traps, I think is what,
Well,
but
it's very, very competitive, very competitive.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of the whole thing, right? Is this friendly, is it a friendly competition, or is it more of like, is it more cutthroat than friendly?
Well, I'll say he was a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy, and I think it was a little bit of cutthroat there. But anyway, I came out on top, and I was happy about that.
That's incredible. And so 11 months, is that after that, is that when you got selected to train on the F4 Phantom, or was there another period in there?
No, it was during that period, that 11-month period, we went back, since we were flying a prop airplane for 11 months and accumulating all that flight time, we went back to Kingsville for about a 3-week period to get a jet refresher in Kingsville. And then from there, I went out to California, and had orders in hand to the F4 Phantom training squadron out at Miramar, Naval Air Station, Miramar, California, San Diego. And delighted with those orders, really happy about it. And I got to San Diego, and I was in paradise, flying the Phantom and being a lieutenant junior grade at the time, and just living the dream.
I believe that just from the young pilots I've known, there's just this. Tell me about the feeling that you felt, as you're, is it this unstoppable feeling? Is it, because you've mentioned that too when we were preparing for this, is that as a fighter pilot, you're like invincible, nobody can touch you. Is that kind of the feeling that you had?
Oh, absolutely. You're bulletproof, you know everything, and that what you don't know, you're going to invent. So, anyway, you're really pumped up about it, and having it at that period of time, I was proud to be able to fly the F4, and brag to my parents, listen, I'm flying an airplane that cost the taxpayer $2.5 million. And now an F-35 costs, I don't know how, billions of dollars, I think. But anyway, at that point in time, $2.5 million is a lot of money. And to be able to fly the airplane and do it well was really a joy.
That's amazing. Who were some of the pilots who trained you? Because obviously, in a squadron, you're surrounded by people who've had more time than you. And so who were some of those early influences on you, and what did they teach you about how to be an aviator? and not just to fly the jet, but to be an aviator in general.
To be a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
That's what you want to be known as a fighter pilot. And I had a number of different role models, all of whom represented to me the essence of what a fighter pilot should be. And I try to pattern my life, my my actions and my personality, if you will, and try to tailor it to the way they live their lives and the way they behave. And too many to mention, but they're all characters in their own right, and just wonderful, wonderful aviators and great professionals and really good fighter pilots. They are really good aviators. So I think good role models to follow.
That's amazing. When and how, because I know you said this could be an episode in and of itself. When did you get your call sign, and how did they give it to you?
Well, when we first started, back in the early 60s, no one really had any call signs. That wasn't really a big deal back then. You'd be number, in a flight of four, you'd be number 1, 2, or 3, or 4, and that was your call sign. Number 4, number 3, number 4. That was your call sign. And or a color, blue 2, blue 3, whatever. That was your call sign. So people had nicknames, and I don't remember really having any sort of nickname. In truth, that people called me Mr. Lewis from time to time. I'm not sure why, but that's hung out over my head. Anyway, the call sign itself didn't come along until much later than the junior officer. So.
Well, we can save that one for whenever it did come about then, because I feel like it'll make more sense if I ask you that. Is that during like the F-14 period, or?
It was during my F-4 life, but Beth.
Okay.
I've got to tell you what, all the background behind all that must remain in the foggy past of fighter lore.
So we can't talk about how bad Fred came to be.
Well, we can talk about it, but I'm not going to tell you.
I feel like maybe we'll have to go visit your old helmet in Oceana when I'm in Virginia Beach, and you can tell me there.
Yeah, perhaps some secretive sort of place.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to remember about all of the fighter pilot lore. There are things that just don't get talked about for good reason, and
exactly right.
And if you hear those stories, you are very lucky. And I've been very lucky to hear a lot of stories that maybe I don't realize I wasn't supposed to hear. And those things must remain sacred. I would never ask you to break open the sacred vault of stories.
That period of time, though, in my life at Miramar, I was the happiest that I could be, pretty much. Sadly, one of the guys I got plowed back with in the training command, he was a very close friend of mine, arrived at the F-4 training squadron a month or so before I attended. And while we were both under training and living the life, believe me, it was just fantastic being in San Diego, being alive and being in San Diego in 1965 was just a beautiful thing. And being a fighter pilot made it even better. So it was really quite a good thing. So a couple of things happened that were a blow to me while I was there. The first thing was this good friend of mine, unfortunately, flew into the ground out near in the desert, out near Barstow, California, and was perished along with his back seater. And I sadly was designated by the commanding officer of the squadron to escort his remains back to his home in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which I did, and that was a very sad period of time. The second sad time for me was, or not sad, so much as kind of disappointing, was after I concluded the training. Carrier called in the F-4 Phantom aboard USS America on the East Coast. As a matter of fact, we had to fly out here to the East Coast to CQ to do a carrier qualification for the F-4. Completed that, flew back to Miramar. I had orders in hand to fighter squadron 142 out in San Diego at Miramar. And I was called down to the CO's office. And he said, well, you got orders to 142. I said, yes, sir, I'm really happy about that. And I cannot wait. He said, well, your orders have been changed. Well, sir, he said, you're going to the East Coast. You're going to an East Coast squadron. You're going to Fighter Squadron 74, embarked on USS Forrestal in the Mediterranean Sea, deployed in the middle of winter in the Mediterranean Sea. I said, wow, okay, and you must pack your bags and get moving. So I did, got back in my car, drove from San Diego to Norfolk, Virginia, and I got on a MAC flight and flew to the Med and joined my first fleet squadron in Mediterranean in 1960, late 65, late 65. And flew out to the ship on the Cod and walked in the red room with my bags and all my flight gear and stuff. And then walked in the red room and they were briefing in flight. And one of the guys, I knew a couple of guys in the squadron as it was. And then when I walked in there, wearing these orange exposure suits, and I said, "Oh my God, this is not going to be fun. We're having to wear poopy. We call them poopy suits, poopy bags, and I have to wear one of those things now. Oh my God, it's going to be very uncomfortable." But the reason I had those orders was that VF-74 there a month prior to my finishing carry call, they lost an airplane on a catch shot. And he was lieutenant commander pilot and a lieutenant backseater, and it was a cold cat shot. The catapult didn't fire fully, so it didn't have enough end speed to get airborne. And when they went into the water just ahead of the ship, both of those guys perished, and that's it. So I was the replacement for the pilot, numerical replacement, not rank structure-wise, numerical replacement for the pilot. And I was the 10th pilot in the squadron. We only had 10 pilots in the squadron. Normally, squadrons today would deploy with 15 or 16 or 17 pilots, I think, about what the number was. But I was the 10th pilot, which was good in the fact that we didn't have to share all the flight time with somebody else. You could get more flying, which I did. But anyway, it was just an interesting situation to enter into.
Sure, you had no time to become part of the squadron. You're just coming in the middle of it. Was that hard? Were you accepted pretty quickly, or how did that work?
That transition was a bit difficult. But the guys in the squadron, they tried to make me as comfortable as I could possibly become, being deployed to a unit that's forward deployed on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Mediterranean units, with high sea states. In fact, I had been on the squadron for about a month, I guess it was, and we made a port call into Malta, and this was in December. We had gotten word aboard ship that the Royal Air Force squadron based there in Malta was going to have a Christmas party, and we were all invited to go to the Christmas party, but it was a formal event, so we had to wear a mess dress. So we went ashore in Malta, about half a dozen of us, and we got a lift out to the Air Force Base, Royal Air Force Base, and to their officers club, and we had a heck of a great time, a lot of fun, just laughing and scratching and so forth. So it was time to go back to the ship, and we went back to the fleet landing, and boating was canceled. We couldn't get out to the ship, and the boats were canceled. So there we were, stuck on the beach in our mess dress, and that lasted for 2 days. We were stuck on the ship, stuck ashore for 2 days in Malta in our mess dress. So we did the best we could. We had a hotel room where everybody slept on the floor and sofas and chairs and whatever else. And finally, they sent the helicopter into ashore, a helo ashore, to ferry us out to the ship. So that's the way we got back aboard. It was really great to be able to take that uniform off and then have it cleaned and take a shower. So that was my introduction to the fleet.
Wow. What a story. Tell me, was this during, because you had 2 deployments to Vietnam, was this one of those? And what can
No,
you tell me? No. Okay. So this was just a med cruise and
Just main cruise. We wrapped up
okay.
4 months later back home, and then we had a year before we were going to turn around and go to Vietnam. So that would have been that was in 1967. So we had about that late. I joined in late '65. Got home in spring of '66. Did some workup training and so forth. Following spring, April timeframe. May no, it was the May timeframe. We deployed on Forrestal to the Tonkin Gulf, and on Forrestal from Norfolk to Rio de Janeiro, around Cape of Good Hope, across the Indian Ocean through the Straits of Malacca to the South China Sea and the Philippines, and that a 30-day transit got us there, and then we started flying and up north to the Gulf of Tonkin, and then the next piece of this story will come up here in just a little bit. We talked about it. It'll almost take a full episode. We talked about that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I would love to hear you talk about it for as long as you want because by the time people see this whole episode, they will have seen pieces of it. So,
Yeah.
this is you just take all the time you need to talk about that. But before you do, I want to ask because I've only known East Coast squadrons my
Yeah.
whole life. That's what I was surrounded by growing up in Norfolk. And what was the difference? Was there a difference in the climate and the culture for, fighter pilots on the West Coast versus East Coast when you did get back to Norfolk and kind of settled in for a little bit before that deployment?
No difference as far as mission is concerned and ability and airmanship and so forth. We all trained in the same kind of squadrons, the same standardized syllable I and all that sort of thing. So no difference there. But there was a bit of a cultural difference. There was definitely a California cultural attitude, and I am a Californian myself. So, and by the way, I had West Coast squadron anywhere, anytime. On my officer preference card for years, and then I never did get back out there. Anyway, to answer your question, yes, there was a bit of a cultural difference, and there's a bit of a rivalry too between the West Coast and the East Coast squadron. So, uh, but it was friendly rivalry, and it was all to the good for all of us.
Sure, in the end, you're on the same team, right? But
Yeah,
there's
good
just,
teammates.
I mean, you see it when you go to the O Club and you see the different squadrons come in and everybody gives each other grief, and it's, I've seen a little bit, I've heard much more than I've seen, but I'd love to ask because uh, something I've often heard, recently Ken Burns came out with the Vietnam documentary. And one of the aspects that he got kind of dinged on was the air war, and that people who fought in the air war in Vietnam didn't sometimes feel like it was included or talked about accurately. And I'd love to get your perception, having participated in it, not necessarily on Ken Burns' take on it, but just what was the air war like for you taking part in it in Vietnam?
Well, it was rather an abrupt end to my first deployment to Vietnam, but and we'll get into that in a minute, as I mentioned before. But the it was a we all felt, I think, that we have a job. We were hired by we were sworn an oath, and we've been directed by our superior officers that this is what we're going to do. We're going to carry out our mission, and that's how we all felt. And however, we felt that way, but in some respects, we didn't really train properly. I don't believe. At least I know that was true. That was the case in my own squadron, VF-74 at the time, because you don't know what you don't know, and we didn't know what the real threat was, what it was going to be like, and so forth. So we did know that they had AAA there, and a lot of the AAA, that's anti-aircraft, artillery, and then later on they had the SAM missiles, so forth. And when we came back from that Mediterranean cruise that I talked to you about, we started preparing slowly for the eventuality of a deployment to the Westpac. The problem for us at the time, however, was that we received brand new airplanes, but as soon as we got brand new airplanes, we had to put them in a modification program. So we had 6 or 7 airplanes under mod all the time. We were back, so we had very few airplanes to fly and to train with. And the leadership at the squadron level and at the air wing level was really sorely wanting in terms of getting us ready to fly, getting us ready to fight. We we were hindered by some few restrictions about what we could do with the airplane at that time. The self-inflicted wounds, I call them, self-inflicted wounds about how we could fly, how we could train, how many G's we could pull, and so forth. So, we were ready in terms of our ability to fly on and off the ship. But we were really not really well prepared at all for combat, what we were going to see. And quite frankly, if we had continued with our deployment on Forrestal in that particular cycle, I'm not sure. I think we would really have had a bad time of it because we were not ready. There's no question about it. Aviation-wise. We would have done the best we could, but we could have been a hell of a lot better prepared had we known how to train a little bit better. The training was woefully inadequate to get us ready for combat. I was a little bit better off because I had that first experience and knew a little bit more when I went back, and then able to pass some of those lessons learned to the new squadron. That's helpful for those guys. So we were a lot better shape, better prepared. That second deployment that I made to Vietnam than we were in the first. It was not a very good thing. We didn't know it at the time, but in hindsight, it's 2020, and as I reflected on that experience over the years, that's been my judgment that we were just woefully prepared. The training was totally inadequate for what we were about to see and engage in. And that we would have probably lost a lot of airplanes and lost a lot of people too, had we not had the event occur on the 29th of July, 1967.
Yeah, and that's what I would love to move forward to. Love is a bad word for that, but the
Yeah.
Forrestal fire on, as you said, July 29th, 1967, that killed 134 sailors and injured 161 others. That was an incident that many, many, many of us know about in a very, textbook kind of way, but you were there when that
Yes.
happened. And I would love it if you could take us back to that day and walk through what it was like for you, what it did for your entire deployment, for the people in your squadron, for the people on the ship, in as much detail as you want to share.
Okay, Beth. I will get into that occurrence, the very, very sad thing that happened, and traumatic situation that developed. 29th of July, 1967 at 10:50 in the morning. I was in my bunk. I just had the Alert 5 for about 2 or 3 hours before that. And so I wanted to get a little bit of rest because I was going to fly that afternoon. I wanted to rest up, get ready for that flight that I was scheduled to go on that afternoon would have been one of the major alpha strikes going into Hanoi that we had been tasked with. So I want to get a little bit of rest. So I was in my bunk. That's when the first bomb went off at 10:50. The bomb was a 500-pound bomb, World War II vintage bomb that we had taken aboard the evening before during an ammo unload. We were alongside the ammunition ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. Commanding officer was a really fine man. His name was John Beeling, a really wonderful person. Anyway, he called the ship to ship on a hotline to the other commanding officer of the replacement ship and said, what are you sending me? He said, well, we got these bombs and we pull out of the armories over in Guam. These are World War II bombs, so they're old. And they were not thermally coated. They didn't have a thermal coating on the bomb to prevent them from detonation under high heat. They were not of that variety. That was one big lesson that we learned as a result of this fire. So he said, well, I'm giving you these bombs. He said, well, they're still certified to be usable. So they said, okay, fine. So accepted all the bombs and came aboard the ship. And the first big alpha strike was supposed to go at 11 o'clock. Remember, the fire started at 10:50, but they were supposed to launch at 11. So one of my squadrons F4 fans on the starboard side aft of the island was loaded with some Zuni rockets, a 5-inch rocket and 2 pods. I think maybe it had 4 pods on it. But, one of the things we learned there is that at the time we would pull all the safety pins while the airplanes were sitting in the pack and not up in the catapult. We pulled the pins out too early, as it turned out. And in this particular case, pulled the pins out and applied electrical power to the airplane, external electrical power to the airplane. And that caused a short circuit of a squid inside the rocket pack, and that fired one of the 5-inch rockets. It went across the flight deck from starboard side to port side and hit an A4 that John McCain was in. It hit his fuel tank. The fuel tank burst open. Of course, fire started. John McCain escaped through the nose of his airplane, and Chief Frederick, who was the leading chief petty officer for something called Repair Party 9. Repair Party 9 was the aircraft firefighting crew. They're the ones who were trained to take care of aircraft fires on the flight deck. But there weren't that many people assigned to that group. Maybe 25 or 30 people, I think. And that's just a guess on my part. I don't know the actual number. Anyway, they were supposed to fight the fire, and it began in earnest. More fuel came streaming down the flight deck back aft. All those old World War II bombs were on airplanes that were back aft on the fantail of the ship. That's the rear end of the ship, the fantail. And fire spread in that direction. People were up on the flight deck trying to fight the fire as best they could. Most of us were not trained to fight the fire. We didn't have to. It was not a requirement to undergo firefighting training at the time. That was changed, of course, after this event occurred. So more bombs went off. Total of 10 total of 10 of these 500-pound bombs went off, and they opened up big gaping holes in the flight deck. The flight deck is 3-inch steel, and back aft in that area, back aft, right below the flight deck, there's a couple of enlisted berthing areas. One was my squadron's night check berthing area, and the other was the sister squadron's night check berthing area. So we lost 45 guys from my squadron who were in there. They had been on our nighttime working crew. They were in their racks trying to get some sleep. It was their sleep time. The same thing with our sister squadron. And general quarters was sounded on the ship, and a lot of them didn't react appropriately to that general quarters klaxon going off. And sadly, most of them perished while they're in their bunks. We lost 45. Our sister squadron lost 41. So the majority of the lives that were lost during that fire were from Fighter Squadron 74 and from Fighter Squadron 11. We continued to fight the fire for most of the rest of that day, and finally put the fire out. Maybe the following day, the fires went out. When we took a look at the damage as it occurred, I think somewhere around 20 airplanes were destroyed, totally destroyed, and about 40 had some kind of partial damage to somewhere in the airplane. I remember being on the flight deck when the fire was going on, seeing some airplanes just pushed over the side. They had a pinhole from a piece of fragmentation, and a little bit of smoke streaming out of the hole, and they pushed the airplane over the side to get rid of it. Some destroyers came alongside to bear a hand to give some fire, put their hoses, their firefighting hoses on the back aft end of the ship, and finally got the fire under control the following day. But it was a traumatic and disastrous. We really thought we were going to lose the ship, quite frankly. Anyway, got the fires out, and then we went from there to back to Subic Bay in the Philippines for repairs. Captain Billing was hopeful of being able to put the ship back together again, be able to get back up on the line and do our job. But unfortunately, that was not to be the case. The ship was too badly damaged to have us do a quick repair and get us back on the line. So the decision was made to send us home. So we had been on the line a total of 4 days. That was the fourth day that we had been engaged in combat operations. The fire occurred, and then we went back to the Philippines and then back home. The opposite direction we took on the way over. Same route. Very sad thing. And it took us 30 days to get home. We made a port visit in Mayport and offloaded the Florida squadrons, and then came up to Norfolk, Virginia. My parents are here from California to see us arrive back home. And when I disembarked from the ship, I was down on the pier with my mom and my dad. looking back at the ship, and I couldn't believe how terrible it looked. It was really a mess. We were really lucky to have saved the ship. Total of the number of people casualties, as you already mentioned those numbers, 131, I think, total overall. Chief Frederick, as I mentioned his name before, he was leading chief petty officer. I remember seeing it on a TV monitor in the squadron ready room, looking down at the area. He was going to try to help John McCain. He had one single CO2 bottle and carrying it down the flight deck against this huge conflagration. Of course, that's not going to do any good. And then watching that happen, then the bomb went off and he disappeared. Chief Frederick was a hero that day. And for that, the Firefighting Training Academy here in Norfolk, Virginia for the Atlantic Fleet is named the Frederick Firefighting Training Academy. And he was that kind of guy. So subsequent to our arrival home, there's a big board of inquiry, as you might imagine. And Captain Beating was found at fault. That was later reversed when we found out that it was really a mechanical problem and procedural problem that contributed to the fire itself. So he was reinstated. He made Admiral, and he retired as a 2-star. So he was exonerated basically from being the causal factor. So a lot of things happened that day. A lot of lives were changed. A lot of lives were lost, of course. And periodically, we've had reunions of the Forrestal survivors of that fire. And there's still some of them hanging around like me. Anyway, that's the Forrestal fire.
Sure. What was morale like when you returned, and how did that, because obviously that cut the deployment short, did it change then the next cycle to lead up for your subsequent, Vietnam deployment? How did that whole period work, and what, losing so many in the squadron too?
Yeah, it impacted all the squadrons, impacted everybody. They had to all be replenished personnel-wise and airplane-wise and so forth, and that happened, and the ship was eventually repaired. But on our way back, on our return voyage after the fire, a few of us, not very many, but a few of us volunteered to go back go back to the war. We wanted to get to the war and go back to combat and so forth. That's what we trained for, and that's what we wanted to do. So about 6 of us, and they go roll in the air of all the air wing pilots, requested transfers. I requested a transfer immediately. And so after we got back, about a few weeks after I got back, I got my oldest to a VF-33, another squadron, deploying the next spring back to Vietnam, which is what I wanted.